Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Virtue Signal. I'm Bill Whittle with my friend AlfonZo Rachel, and this is the show where we try to talk about some of the philosophy and morality beneath the politics and the news of the day. And Zoe, we were talking a little bit before the show started that we probably should talk about this shooting situation with Daunte Wright. And I think the thing to concentrate on, at least in the context of this kind of show, is how different people can see the same piece of video, because nobody was there except for the people that were there, and see different things. Now, when I had heard about the shooting before I saw the video, and I believe my personal opinion, again, all I did was see the video. My personal opinion, as I pointed out in one of our right angles, is that the officer was adrenalized, didn't realize she was holding a pistol. I find that to be an understandable mistake, although it's not an understandable mistake to fly an airplane into a mountain if you're an airline pilot. But I have to say, and the great thing about this show is that we can all be honest about these things, and this is where the different lenses come into play. I'm watching this video, and I see him struggling with the police and then getting into the car. And I'm thinking to myself, this is my honest first thought. Well, if I tried to break free from the police, got into my car, and started driving away from an arrest, I wouldn't be too terribly surprised if I was shot. Mm-hmm. That was what I was thinking myself. Now, I haven't had any bad run-ins with the cops, and that's the lens that I see things through as a general rule. But a lot of other people see it through that lens as well. In other words, you've got a guy who the police knew in advance had a warrant on him, had a reputation for fighting, might have been armed. You've got the guy essentially handcuffed, and then he's struggling and he's getting in the car trying to make an escape. I just don't think that that's a really smart procedure for anybody of any color. And that's probably where I want to stop in terms of my first reaction. Other people see this video and see the exact same situation and call it cold-blooded murder. Like the officers were looking for a chance to shoot this black man down. And I don't know if the truth lies anywhere between these two positions, but I do know that the left and their constant, endless division of America along racial lines has now made it impossible for any sense of justice to prevail, either in that case or in the case up in Minneapolis. And what do we do about this other than just honestly talk about what we see and what we think and what we feel about all of it?
Well, that seems to be like the ongoing desires that we need to have the conversation. And as far as when we talk about having a conversation, Bill, that's exactly what we mean. We mean, let's have the conversation. But as far as the left goes, it's not about having a conversation, even though that's what they demand. We need to talk about this and we need to have an open discussion. But that's not what they want. They want a vent. They want you to be an audience to their catharsis. That's what they want. They want to lay out their blame. They want to accuse of this and want to accuse of that. And a lot of this stuff is just insecurities that don't even have anything to do with the subject at hand that they want that they claim to want cleared up or want the record straight on things. They really.
Sorry to interrupt. So when the police say, and this happened only 11 miles from where George Floyd incident happened. What does that have to do with anything other than to make this political point about, hatred and all the rest of it? Sorry to cut you off. I just thought that was such an unbelievably flagrant example of the news media spinning this the way they wanted to.
And they're part of it. Even the people who are in the media, these people are emotionally damaged people. They're damaged good. They're damaged idols. Right. And people look up to these people and they get their wokeness their wokeness cues from them. And it's both, they're both dependent on each other. They're dependent on the so-called woke crowd for their ratings, and the woke crowd is, dependent on them for some, validation of this justice. Vengeance really is what they want. But, on one note also, Bill, it's like with the body cams. There was this demand for body cams. For what? We still haven't dealt with the fact that people see things that they want to see. You can have body cams all day, right? And so we can look at the same information, but somebody's going to have a different take on it according to their emotions. Right, according to what they want to be right, according to who they want to who they want to judge. So these things, that's not the answer to these things. Even a body cam issue, and a point about adrenaline. watching, this officer shoot this person, yeah, it's difficult for me to say that there's an excuse for that. There's dynamics that goes into, deploying your sidearm and your taser, factors that are in there to pretty much ensure that, hey, you can't get this wrong. It makes me wonder, like, the person's instincts, Daunte, I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here. It's like, maybe his instincts were correct. It's like, dude, I'm in danger right now. And as it turns out, I mean, even though it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, it's like, look, man, I'm surrounded by people who have arms, man. I'm scared. Maybe deep down, he's like, I know I messed up. They're going to call me out on this and go really wrong for me. And it did. Now, but that adrenaline factor. Now, me being a student of martial arts and a teacher of martial arts, even my adrenaline has gotten the best of me. To where it's like, despite the training, despite the bare knuckle sparring that we would do, we would go at it like wolves, man. And just to really deal with the shock factor of what it's like to get hit, choked out, slammed on the ground without freaking pads. I'm talking concrete, so that kind of mud and blood kind of fighting. And, I've never been in a personal fight. I've never fought over something personal, but I have worked as a bouncer. And even as a bouncer, man, despite the training, there's like this shut off. It's like, okay, when you wake up, I've got like a person like in a chokehold and I'm crushing his throat and my partner is having to mace me, not him, me. Dude, let him go. I'm like, what? And just walking off, and it's like the mace doesn't even faze me. So when you got that adrenaline cooking, man, who knows what can happen. So in that, sure, I can extend the grace of saying, hey, man, maybe she really just wasn't aware of what was in her hand at that time. But hey, if this is your job, this is what you signed up for. And especially when you kind of got other people around you also say, hey, she's going taser. Where, does the cop have it in his periphery? Say, hey, that's not a taser. That's your sidearm. You might want to put that, reach for the other one. So there's different factors that are in play, man. I don't have all the evidence, man. Just like you say, we have this studio, man, that we're looking at this whole thing through, and until this has gone into its due process, innocent until proven guilty, man.
Yeah. And look, there's no question. There's no question that the police officer was in error here. I mean, that's not even up for discussion. I guess the thing I'm talking about is, like I said, some people see this and say, well, he shouldn't have run. Other people see this and said the police were just looking for an excuse to kill him. Neither one of those positions strikes me as completely realistic. But I guess if we're going to get down, like I say, to the brass tacks on this, is the cyclical nature of this. What seemed clear to me was that this was not an intentional murder. It's also clear to me that this officer is definitely responsible for what happened because she has been issued a firearm and a badge with which to use that firearm legally, and she shot a guy who she didn't intend to and killed him, and that is not an act without consequences. I'm not trying to say that. But watching it myself, I said, this looks like a terrible error. It's not, I don't even want to call it an accident, it is an error. And then you start getting into things like, okay, if I go to for example, and these things have happened. Somebody's got a gangrenous wound in their leg, and they go to the hospital, and got a gangrenous wound in their right leg, and they go to have their right leg amputated below the knee. There have been times when people come out and they had their left leg amputated below the knee. Now, that's an error, but that's not okay. It's not the kind of thing we just go, oh, well, these things happen. But I guess what I'm talking about the cycle is that if you are convinced that the police are there to shoot you, and in this particular case, especially if you know you're guilty, you have a warrant out on you or something, then the inclination to run is higher, and the more running is done, the more violence is done, the more likely it is that something is going to happen. What I think you can say without too much argument is if he hadn't resisted and tried to make an escape, he wouldn't have gotten shot. Now, that is a perspective on the issue. But again, where I guess what I'm saying is somewhere in here, somewhere in this discussion, which is never, ever brought up anywhere, is the issue of human fallibility rather than human malice. I've studied just about every major plane accident that's ever occurred because I'm a pilot and I want other people to make fatal mistakes so that I don't have to. And so I study them with a great deal of intent. And time again, you see cases where these guys just didn't do what they were trained to do, didn't do what they were supposed to do, ignored this, and killed 150 people. You can't excuse that. But you also cannot say that they intended to murder themselves and their passengers. By the way, there are a small subset of cases where the pilot actually did intend to kill people. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a pilot and co-pilot make a really series of very bad decisions and people get killed and it goes down to pilot error, and that doesn't do anything for the people, including the pilots' families. It doesn't do anything to mitigate it. But for me, on some level, trying to live in the real world, I understand that people make mistakes, and sometimes they make very, very bad mistakes. And what happened here was not a case of a simple accident. We don't charge people with manslaughter. If you're driving along the road and you're in a rainstorm and your car suddenly starts to hydroplane and you T-bone some other car, generally speaking, that's dismissed as an accident. You didn't intentionally mean to hurt those people or kill them. Mm-hmm. It just happened. This is someplace more volitional than that. But the one thing I notice in society is that nobody's having this conversation, right? Where exactly does human fallibility come into this, and how much of it should be excused and how much of it should not be excused?
Well, there's for lack of a better word, I'm going to use the word blame. There's plenty enough blame to go around for it in incidences like this. Of course, I think we agree. Hey, Daunte, man, you should have just cooperated with procedures, man. This probably could have turned out a lot, better. You'd probably still be alive. I mean, I take my own experience, man. Even just recently, maybe within the past year, I had a run-in with the police. I'm here in my studio, man. And, the police came rapping at the door, boom, 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 right? That cop knock, right? Yeah. So I answered the door, because they said it police. And there's a door and then there's another door that they're looking through. So I could see them, they can kind of see me. And I'm just like, hey, well, I'm bringing my hands out, because they're actually on the hunt, right? So I'm like, hey, here's both my hands, man. They're like, okay, now come on out, face away from us, and walk, and all the rest of the steps, right? So I got my hands up, man. Now, according to the media, basically this is it for me, right? I got these two cops, and they look like the stereotypical skinheads, right? It's like, look, man, are you guys Gestapo, right? So I just step on out, man, got my hands up, and according to media, man, it's like the last thing I'm gonna see, Bill. The last thing I'm gonna see is my shadow on the wall with my hands up, right?
Did you really think that?
It crossed my mind, right?
All right, that's all I need to know.
It crossed my mind. But the thing is, it crossed my mind because of not necessarily because of my own experiences. I'm not a kind of person that has a chip on my shoulder about race. Right, so it wasn't like that kind of thing. But it's like, I know that this is what the media, this is the narrative that's going on out there. And it probably could have crossed the cop's mind too. It's like, man, let's hope that this guy isn't one of those people that's just fully given over to cops are evil and stuff like that and doesn't do something stupid, right? So these things are going through my mind. But the prevalent thing that's going through my mind, Bill, is be still and know that I am God. So I'm going to chill, man. It's just like, hey, I'm not going to compound the issue. I'm not going to compound and get myself into more danger. And before I know
Did they have weapons drawn?
I don't know. All I saw, it's I don't know. They could have. I don't know. Like I said, I could kind of see them when they asked me to come out because I kind of like have a screen, like keeping flies and getting in and all that sort of stuff. So I, be able to party. But at any rate, before I knew it, they were like, "Okay, man, you can relax. Go ahead and put your hands down, and mind if we have a look around in your studio." There's a person, we got reports of a burglar and stuff like that. So I'm like, hey, yeah, come on in, man, because if there's a burglar out there, I got nice stuff in here. I want you to catch him. Okay. So you got my full cooperation. They're like, wow, man, this is really nice. And it's like, what kind of music are you working on and stuff like that. So it turned out to be a nice conversation, and they were like, okay. And it was short because they had to get back out there and catch him. Like, yeah, go ahead and get on out of here. You go catch that guy. But it's just another example, Bill, is, hey, you got my cooperation, man. I'm not insecure about anything that I've done. I'm not insecure about you. But I know that there's that dynamic out there. So that kind of introduces a little bit of apprehension, but I'm not going to be ruled by fear. I'm going to give myself over to the confidence and the tranquility of the Lord and say, he'll get me through this. I'm going to be all right. I don't have it. I don't have anything to be ashamed of. I'm not exuding anything, or I don't have any sort of record that they would have to try to be apprehensive of me for. They're just looking for somebody. They haven't run my plates or run any sort of identification check. And I want to say this really quick, because there's a lot of people out there who, struggle with wanting to show their ID and stuff like that. What do you need to see my ID for and stuff like that? I hope that folks can understand, and I hope people are going to say I'm being a commie statist when I say this. Your identification was issued to you by the state. So yes, the state has the right to ask for it, right? It's part of our agreement to be able to keep each other safe. And if we have these people like the police and stuff like that, whom we are supposed to have, this agency that's supposed to keep each other, keep us safe and stuff like that. When the state asks for the ID, that they issue to you, it's like, yes, it is kind of theirs, it's you, but it is theirs to be able to examine and say that, yes, you are who you say you are. So there's that degree of cooperation. There's nothing wrong about that. There's nothing really overtly submissive about that. It's straight up cooperation. Just do it. It'll avoid you a lot of drama.
When you were talking about this, I thought, wow, that's not something I've ever experienced, and it isn't. But I will say this. If somebody came and banged on my door and I opened the door and I saw white police officers and their weapons were drawn at me and they were leveled at me and they told me to get out of the office and turn around and face the wall, I suspect that would have crossed my mind too. Is this wall the last thing I'm going to see? It's not a nice feeling to have people pointing weapons at you, especially when people seem to be pretty excited about all of that. Now, with all of that said, the fact is that there are not equal outcomes to these kind of things as a general rule. How much of that is based on disproportionate amount of crime is part of the equation. The world I want to live in is a world where that doesn't matter, and I'm not so naive to say that is the case. But I do think that police. Let me put it to you this way. If a policeman comes up to my car and stops me at a traffic stop, I'm not at all worried about what's going to happen, at all. Now, part of that, people would say, well, you're not worried because you're white. That actually may be true. But the reason I'm not worried is because I don't have anything on my criminal record. Not a mark on me. And I know that when the police run my tags before they come up to the side of the car, they know that. If I'd had a number of felony weapons charges or attempted murder, something like that, I would expect they would treat me a little bit differently. But nevertheless, that difference is there. People do make assumptions. And because we can't talk about, meaning the rest of this society, not us, the reason that no one can talk about these things is because this is where the answers are. This is where genuine racial harmony and progress comes from, is understanding that there is a different outcome based on your skin color. Now, why that happens is a complex issue, but it's there. We'd like it to go away. And I have to tell you, man, one of the things about context is how often does this happen? How often does a police officer of any color shoot a civilian of any color with a pistol thinking it's a taser? How often is this failure rate? I mean, they pulled this vaccine. They vaccinated tens of millions of people, and one person has died, so they stopped the vaccine. We don't live in a perfect world. And this is why I want to come back just for a minute to this whole idea of like aircraft crash examinations. the reason that the NTSB does the work it does and is so thorough about the work that it does, and the reason that a lot of pilots, guys like me, read these things voraciously is because we want to learn from them. Mm-hmm. We don't want it to happen again. I don't want to make a mistake that will kill me and my passengers if somebody else has already made that mistake. I want to be able to learn from that experience and know what to do next time so that I don't get that outcome. And because no one can talk about this, because everybody's got their trenches, there are some people who say that there's absolutely no difference between white people and black people the way they're treated by police. They're just wrong about that. There are other people who say that the police are just out to murder black people. That's what they're there for. They're wrong about that too. Nobody gets to learn anything about how to avoid these things in the future because nobody's willing to talk about the full dynamic of what actually goes on in a situation like that, including the possibility that a person maybe is just not right for that job, because you should not be so adrenalized as a police officer, especially after the amount of time she had on the force, where you can't tell the difference between your pistol and a taser. That's why you have a taser. And that is part of her professional responsibility. I expect a police officer to know the difference between a pistol and a taser. And I also expect a doctor, if he's going to perform an amputation, to know that he's amputating the correct leg. And as a small little parenthetical, one of the reasons that a lot of medical errors have declined significantly in the last several years is that doctors have learned from what airline pilots have done. In other words, doctors have learned about stuff that in aviation we call cockpit resource management. You check with somebody else before you do something. Are we in agreement that this is the correct flap setting? Yes, we are in agreement. Let's proceed. And there's been an effort to bring that into emergency surgeries and emergency rooms, and that has succeeded as well. So how are we ever going to learn how to reduce these things if we don't talk about it? And if we do what we're doing right now, which is report the news in such a way that it reinforces one group of people's view of the police and immediately reinforces the other group's willingness to defend the police, all it does is pull us further apart, digs us into our trenches, and means that the next time this happens, and it will, we're even further apart and even further away from any kind of a civilized response to these kind of tragedies that don't happen very often, but they happen.
Sure, man. And it gets down to when we when we have these talks, what is the objective? What is the solution? What is the agreed solution to these things? You have people out there, for them, their solution is condemnation, is punishment. Somebody, and what is the measure of this punishment? You have people that, and I'm just like saying there's I'm talking about the consistency of these things. You know, when we talk about the consistency of the solution, whereas we want to have this discussion so this stuff doesn't happen anymore because people have learned from it. And then on the other hand, you have people saying, yo, this isn't going to happen anymore because we're going to hang the people who did it. You know, they won't be alive to do it anymore. So, you know, what is the elixir to these things? What are we going to agree to as far as that goes? There's no sense of like, grace or forgiveness. And even that is selective. Like say, for instance, with, Daunte. Okay. Now you can go ahead and run his record. Yeah, this guy's he's got some issues. Oh, but you're not supposed to judge him for a past. Why are you judging him for his past? Why are you guys sweating him? Why are you harassing him and stuff like that? Meanwhile, these people judge America for its past all the time. So these people, you're never supposed to bring up their past. You're never supposed to bring up their record and all this sort of stuff. They're just an innocent person. And that's it. But on the other hand, they hold on. They have a tight grip on people's transgressions on this arena. They can never be forgiven for these things. So it's like, where's the consistency there? Or even as far as with those who may be pro-police, you know, who tend to be more on the conservative angle. It's like we need to be consistent on how we view police, because on one hand, we treat police like they're the saints of the streets. But then before you know it, all of a sudden, they're masked Nazis and agents of the state who are trying to oppress us. Well, which one is it? On one, because honestly, Will, sometimes it looks like all of a sudden the police are saints if they have to shoot down a black person. But if a police questions a white person who's wearing a mask, all of a sudden they're Nazis now. So which one is it? You know, playing devil's advocate here, because sometimes that's what it looks like.
No, you're right. You're right. And this is a result of politicizing everything, and it drives both sides insane.
Yes.
It makes it just a knee-jerk emotional response. And I think the one thing I don't know if it would even apply in this case, in the Daunte Wright case, but I almost did a story on this last week. I read a story, and it was kind of a comical story, but it didn't necessarily have to end up comically. There was a guy called the police in Fort Lauderdale, a white guy as I understand it, and called the police out because someone had keyed his car. And a Fort Lauderdale policeman responded, and his partner did as well. And they took a look at the damage, and they told the guy, well, it's not $1,000 worth of damage. The person's not on the scene. There's nothing we can do about it. We're not even going to file a report. At which point, the person who called the police was so disgusted that he took his flashlight and threw it away. Not at the policeman. He threw it away in anger. So the police grab him, smash him down to the ground, practically dislocate his shoulder. He's trying to get into his house, and as they enter the house, they see these Star Trek Klingon weapons that are mounted on the wall, these blade weapons, right? You know, the kind of swords with like 17 different serrated edges and so on. So now they claim, well, there's weapons in the house. Now we're going to have to be extremely, brutal with this guy. So this guy ends up suing the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. And the reason I wanted to talk about that was one of these two, as I understand it, one of these two officers had been already cited and investigated for excessive use of force 79 times.
Yikes.
79 times. And we saw this again and again and again with the George Floyd thing where you would see a municipal police department would hire an officer who has previously 15 investigations or whatever into excessive use of force. If we're so desperate for police that we have to recruit thugs like this, then we ought to be paying them an awful lot more money. And again, by and large, the system, considering the number of interactions there are with the police on a daily basis, actually works relatively well for a well-armed and rebellious society. But sometimes you have to look at the obvious things. I know for a fact that when it comes to medical malpractice and the rates that every doctor has to pay for medical malpractice insurance, that the huge majority of malpractice cases come down to a very, very, very small number of doctors who do it again and again and again and again and again. At what point are we going to start to say, hey, listen, here's something that's easy to do that we can all agree on? It may be true that this brutal cop would treat a rich old white man in a Mercedes differently than he would treat a black man, but who's going to have a problem with getting that guy off the force? I'm not going to have a problem with that. I don't want that guy on the police force at all. And there are a number of bad cops out there, not a lot, but enough of them. And I don't know if it's the police unions that are protecting them. I don't know if it's the fact that everybody is now so deep in their pro-police, anti-police trenches. But it is the responsibility of a civilized society to get bad cops off the street, to get bad doctors out of hospitals, and to get bad pilots out of cockpits. That's not fascism. That's not politics. It's not partisanism. It's common sense, and it is an appropriate response for rational people who want to live together in harmony to get the people who can't do their jobs out of their jobs.
Yes, indeed, man. Yes, indeed. And and just like you gave the examples of doctors who make these mistakes, police who make these mistakes, who can have a record, so and it gets selective about what people are going to say about records. When you have a perp or a suspect, you're not supposed to bring up their past and anything like that. But they'll make sure that they want to bring up the police officer's past, right? So people can have selective outrage about these things. Yep. And but once again, Bill, I mean that's we're dealing with what people want to believe. And until we get this refined, and who knows how long it's going to take. How are we going to do this? I mean, when are we talking about what the psychology of this? Is that what we're talking about? Is trying to get down to people's psyche? There's no way to do that in the natural. It's not possible. Because even when people talk about, whether it's the psychology of the cop or the psychology of the person on the street that they're pulling over, how do you examine these things? Psychology even itself is not is that what people are going to apply? Because it's really not a true science. Because psychology on its face, if I can really quick, it's not really the study of the mind. The word psych, when we look at the word psych, you break it down, it actually means the soul. So when you talk about psychology, you're talking about the study of the soul. When we have demonstrations of intellect or demonstrations of reason or what like that. You know, you could do like these sort of tests and stuff like to be able to measure these things, right? There's a measurement of this stuff. There's no measurement of the soul. It's arguable if for people if the soul even exists. They try to take measurements, you know, going through the old ages. If a person died, they wait for him to die so they can measure if he got any lighter, if his soul left him or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, these things are not measurable. So how is it that we're going to have a study, a science of something that can't actually be measured if we can't even agree that it exists? So what I'm saying, Bill, is that how are we going to apply a psychoanalysis of something and expect that we're going to get solid and true results over something that we can't even agree that can be measured? So is that the proper approach to this? That's why I rely on this thing. So this is my study manual. This is my PDF, if you will. I mean, my PDR. I don't know what it is for being a psychologist.
It's also your FAQ, isn't
Right.
it? I mean, it's your frequently asked questions response right there.
Right. Embarrassingly, I got my PDF and my PDR and all those desk references mixed up. But y'all know what I'm saying. But that's the thing that I go to. And the thing is, Bill, we're being more and more discouraged from doing that. And we wonder why society is constantly collapsing. And we're being told that by, these man-made methods, we're going to figure this out. But we're getting more and more disconnected. We're finding more effective ways, more sophisticated ways to disconnect ourselves.
That's right.
And last point, and that's why the Lord himself, he's not only Davidic, he's a Levite, right? The Levites being the priest. And the funny thing is, Bill, that the word Levite itself means connected. That's what it means. And our high priest, Yeshua, the Levite of Levites, is the one who connects us to God, the one who created us in his image. And we don't see that in ourselves anymore. And it's more and more we're becoming disconnected. And sad things are happening because of things like this, because people just don't have that peace to be able to just, chill, and don't compound the problem. Don't let your fear and your insecurity get the best of you, because these things don't have to end like this.
No, they don't. And that's just really well said. Just to wrap this up, my experience, I haven't had this experience very often, but I've had it often enough for it to be consistent. I've done an awful lot of public speaking events, I think 200 at least. And most of these are preaching to the choir, and I go to Republican events and Tea Party events and so on. So I don't get to run into an awful lot of spirited opposition, but it's happened a number of times. And the one thing I've learned about meeting people who really strongly, violently, perhaps even disagree with you is, if you are willing to sit down and have a conversation with them, what you will discover relatively quickly, it's not right away because everybody's very angry, but if you're willing to stay with a discussion with somebody who you are violently opposed to philosophically, you will begin to discover at the minimum that they are a human being who has at least perceived grievances that are real. You may not think they're real grievances, but they do. And time again, when I went out there as sort of a representative of conservatism, I thought, and I've done colleges and I've done some hostile audiences, I always thought that my mission here was to give people an idea of what conservatism really means. But as I got home on every one of these cases, I realized, no, that wasn't my mission. What I actually accomplished was not so much to explain conservatism. What I accomplished was I managed to convince these people that I was a human being with real feelings and actually cared about these things and cared about people as well and had a different approach to how to solve some of these problems. But I wasn't this kind of, privileged monster that's just saying, throw some more brown people onto the fire. I'm a little chilly today. And it's that fundamental humanity that you have in a face-to-face conversation with somebody that you can come away with, continue to disagree, but with respect. And the problem with the internet is it allows us to launch those head arguments against each other without any connection to the humanity and the reality of that other person. And that's why things continue to get more and more toxic. People have said things about me, and I'm sure about you online, that they would never dare say to our faces, because if they did, they'd get punched in the nose, and rightfully so. And the reverse is true as well. So this is our small bit to to encourage everybody out there to realize that your perspective on things is your perspective on things. I'm not for a second saying that truth is relative, but I am saying that we flawed human beings that look at the world through a cocktail straw often miss perspectives that are genuinely there. And it would behoove all of us, I think, to have a little humility and a little bit of forgiveness and grace when dealing with issues that are this contentious, because this is when we need them now more than ever. So,
yes, indeed.
For my good friend and colleague, AlfonZo, Rachel, I'm Bill Whittle. The show is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com. And if you think important conversations like this need to be held, we can't do it without your support. So we'd love to see you become a member or make a one-time donation at BillWhittle.com. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next time right here on The Virtue Signal.